My stepmother printed a name tag for me at my father's birthday party. Under my name, in smaller letters, it said, "The Disappointment." I picked it up, smiled, asked a server for a glass of champagne, and gave a toast nobody at that party will ever forget. By the time I walked out the door, I'd already signed the lease on a life that didn't include any of them. Original post. I'm 32, female, and my dad, James, is the kind of man who needs everything around him to look correct. Correct house, correct image, correct family photo for the holiday card every December, the same forced smiles arranged in the same order every year. When my parents divorced, I was 10 years old, and on the surface it was quiet, no screaming matches, no custody battle splashed across anyone's gossip, just two adults signing papers and dividing a life that had taken 12 years to build. My dad remarried within 14 months. Her name was Stephanie, and she came with 2 kids from a previous marriage, Hunter and Olivia, both a little younger than me, both about to become the entire center of gravity in a household I used to think of as mine. I want to be fair, because I was 10, and 10-year-olds don't always read situations correctly the first time around. I tried. I genuinely tried for longer than I probably should have. Stephanie was warm in public in that overly rehearsed way, the kind of warm that makes adults in the room say, "What a lovely woman," under their breath, and makes the kid standing closest to her quietly understand that something underneath it doesn't match. She hugged a little too long, held on a beat past comfortable, said, "We're going to be best friends," a little too often and a little too brightly, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized but never quite believed. Behind the front door, once the guests had gone home and the performance could finally stop, the math was simple and never once changed. Her kids came first. Always, in every version of every decision, for the rest of my childhood and most of my adult life. It started small, the way these things always seem to. My soccer games got missed for reasons that always sounded reasonable in isolation. Hunter's never did. My school pickups got forgotten, my dad arriving 40 minutes late with an apology that had already gone stale by the time he said it. Olivia's dance recitals never did, not one, not in 9 years. By 14 I was the built-in babysitter on weeknights while Hunter and Olivia did 0 chores and faced 0 consequences for the chaos they left behind them. If I complained, even gently, even once, my dad would sigh like I was the exhausting one in the conversation, like my noticing the imbalance was somehow worse than the imbalance itself. Stephanie had a simpler approach. She just called me selfish, smiling pleasantly the entire time she said it, like the word cost her nothing and meant nothing and somehow still landed every single time. The real proof, the kind that doesn't leave room for interpretation, came when I was 16. My mom had set up a college fund for me years earlier, adding to it steadily, the kind of quiet and unglamorous love that only becomes visible decades later when you understand what it actually took. My dad had access to part of it through the custody agreement, a detail buried in paperwork nobody expected to matter. He drained it. Not all at once, not in some dramatic single withdrawal that might have triggered alarms sooner. Slowly, over almost 2 years, a little here and a little there, until my mom finally noticed the balance and took him to court over it. She got some of it back. Not all of it. I paid for college myself after that, every dollar, working 2 jobs through most of it and carrying the loans for years afterward, and there is a particular kind of resentment that settles into a person when they realize they had to build their own foundation while watching someone else's children stand comfortably on one that should have been theirs too. I want to move forward instead of cataloging every individual slight along the way, because the accumulated pattern is the actual point, not an exhaustive inventory of every small cruelty. I graduated, built a real life for myself, met my husband Daniel somewhere in the middle of all of it, bought a house without a single cent for my father, and kept a careful, practiced distance from that side of the family the way you keep distance from a stove that has burned you more than once before. I still went to the occasional holiday gathering because my Aunt Margaret, my dad's sister, is one of the only people on that side of the family genuinely worth keeping in my life. Margaret is the one who called 2 days before my dad's 60th birthday party and said, gently, "Just come for a little while. Maybe things have shifted." Some part of me, the same part that has been wrong about this family for as long as I can remember, wanted very badly to believe her. I walked into the venue, a rented hall Stephanie had clearly spent weeks decorating with the kind of obsessive attention she reserves for anything other people might photograph, expensive catering, elaborate floral arrangements, the works, because everything in Stephanie's life has to look like a magazine spread whether or not the substance underneath matches the image. I saw the name tag table near the entrance before I'd even taken off my coat. Stephanie does this at every gathering she hosts, claims it, helps people mingle, lining up small laminated cards in neat rows like place settings at a dinner only she had planned. Uncle Mark. Cousin Rachel. Neighbor Tom. Mine. My name printed in the same clean font as everyone else's, and underneath it, in smaller letters that someone had typed out deliberately and chosen to laminate, permanent in a way that felt purposeful, the disappointment. I stood there for about 5 seconds doing the math on what I was actually looking at, my brain needing an extra beat to process something that simple and that cruel. Then I heard the laugh. Stephanie, wine glass tilted casually in one hand, watching me from across the room with a small satisfied smirk she didn't even bother trying to hide, like she had been waiting for this exact moment since the invitations went out. I didn't leave. I want to explain why, because the explanation matters more than the moment itself. I had been collecting things for years without ever quite admitting to myself what I was building. Screenshots saved into folders with boring, forgettable names. Text threads I told myself I kept, just in case, though in case of what, I never let myself finish the sentence. A file I had started after the college fund lawsuit settled, back when I was 18, that I never quite got around to closing even after the case ended. I had documentation of years of missed events, the messages where Stephanie called me selfish in writing because she'd never been careful enough to assume I'd keep them, even an old recording from a family dinner 2 years earlier where my dad told me, almost offhandedly, over dessert, that Stephanie's kids were easier to love because they didn't make everything so difficult. I had never used any of it. I had just kept it the way you keep a fire extinguisher mounted on a wall you genuinely hope you'll never need to reach for. Standing at that name tag table with the laminated card still warm from my own hand, I made a decision that felt less like a sudden choice and more like the end of a very long, very patient countdown. Not to leave quietly the way I always had before, to finally use what I had. I set the tag back down on the table, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and put on the kind of smile that makes people nervous precisely because it doesn't match the situation they're watching unfold. I took a glass of champagne off a passing tray, the bubbles catching the light from the chandelier overhead. My dad found me a few minutes later, drink already in hand, asking in his usual careful tone if I'd been keeping busy, which is the question he reaches for when he wants credit for showing interest without doing any of the actual work that interest requires. I told him about the house, watched something behind his eyes fail to add up correctly. A house, bought without his help, didn't fit neatly into the story he had spent years constructing where I was the lost one, the difficult one, the daughter who never quite managed to figure her life out the way Hunter and Olivia clearly had. Stephanie arrived right on cue, all teeth, and said, pitched just loud enough for the people standing near us to hear clearly, well, at least she finally did something responsible. I asked her, lightly, almost conversationally, whose idea the name tag had been. She laughed it off immediately, said I always took things too personally, said it was only a joke, the way she always said things were only jokes right up until the moment someone called her on them directly. I told her she was right. I said I had a joke too, actually, now that she mentioned it. Then I raised my glass. Update 1. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something shifts in the air before anyone has actually said anything specific yet, conversations trailing off mid-sentence, heads turning one by one, the particular silence of 40 people slowly realizing they're about to witness something they were never officially invited to witness. I toasted my father's 60th birthday first, kept it warm, almost gentle. Polite nods rippled around the room. I toasted Stephanie next, for teaching me something I genuinely couldn't have learned anywhere else in quite the same way. Stephanie's smile held for exactly as long as it took her to realize, somewhere in the middle of that sentence, that I wasn't joking at all. I laid it out in order after that, methodically, like a closing argument I had apparently been quietly assembling since I was 10 years old without ever fully admitting it to myself. The missed soccer games stacked against the football games never missed. The drained college fund and the 2 years it took my mother to notice. The years of being told, gently and then not so gently, that I was simply too sensitive every single time I dared to notice I was being treated like a second-tier member of my own family. I didn't raise my voice once through any of it. I didn't need to. My dad set his drink down on a nearby table at some point without appearing to notice he had done it, his hand trembling slightly in a way I don't think he intended anyone to see. Then I said the line I had been carrying, unspoken, for longer than I'd realized. To the last time you'll ever see me. I set my glass down gently on the table beside me. I walked out through the front doors into the cool evening air. I didn't turn around to watch their faces, but Margaret texted me roughly 40 minutes later and described it for me anyway, my father standing completely frozen near the center of the room, Stephanie's jaw actually dropping open before she managed to catch herself and snap it shut, somebody near the back of the crowd muttering, "Wait, what just happened?" into the silence that followed. Update 2. Here's the part one hadn't told anyone yet. The part that I think matters considerably more than the toast itself, even though the toast is the part everyone wants to talk about. 2 weeks before that party, I had already met with a lawyer. Not because I was planning the toast in advance, because I genuinely wasn't, not consciously, not as any kind of coordinated scheme. I had finally decided, after years of putting it off, to formally request the financial records connected to the trust my mother had set up when I was small, the same one my father had partially drained when I was 16. There was a clause buried deep in the original paperwork that I hadn't fully understood until recently, one that meant if mismanagement could be proven to have occurred before I turned 18, there existed a legal path to recovering the remainder with accumulated interest, even decades later, through a relatively straightforward civil case. I had started the process quietly, the way I tend to do most things that genuinely matter to me. I hadn't told the wider family because I didn't want it weaponized into yet another reason I was being difficult or money-hungry or accused of holding onto old grudges I should have let go of by now. The day after the party, my lawyer called with an update. The paperwork had moved through faster than either of us expected because, as it turned out, my father had recently refinanced the house, and the trust violation surfaced automatically during a routine title search. Which meant his own bank had flagged the discrepancy before I had even formally filed anything myself. Which meant the timing of my toast and the timing of this entirely separate legal matter colliding in the very same week looked, from the outside, exactly like the kind of coordinated, calculated takedown I had never actually planned with that precision. I let that assumption sit unchallenged. I didn't bother correcting it. Update 3. My dad called the following morning. "Where are you?" he said, in that particular tone he has always used that somehow implies I'm the one who has disappointed him, regardless of the actual context or who did what to whom. I told him I was home and that I wasn't coming back. He said, "You can't just leave like this. This family, we have to stick together." I told him I agreed with that completely, and that sticking together was exactly why I was leaving, because I had spent 22 years watching what sticking together actually meant inside his house, and it had never once, not a single time, meant me. That was the last time we spoke directly to each other. The family group chat, which I had been quietly muted in for over a year already, apparently became something close to a battlefield in the days that followed. My maternal aunt said I had embarrassed everyone in front of people who mattered. My paternal relatives, the ones who actually knew what that house had been like from the inside, mostly went quiet in a way that read, at least to me, as a kind of support even without anyone saying it directly. Hunter sent a long message I didn't read past the first line. Olivia didn't send anything at all, which honestly tracked with everything I already knew about her. Stephanie sent one message exactly a week later. Not an apology, an accounting. A long list of things she claimed she had always done for me over the years, followed by a closing line about how I had humiliated her in front of everyone she knows at an event she had spent months planning. I read it twice, took a screenshot for the folder out of habit, and replied with a single sentence, "The name tag is still in my bag if you want it back." Then I blocked her number entirely. The legal case is still moving forward as of this writing. My lawyer says it will likely settle out of court within the next few months, given how clean the records are and how thoroughly the violation is documented at this point. The amount isn't really what matters most to me, though I won't pretend a number that size means absolutely nothing to a person who once had to work 2 jobs through college because that money had quietly vanished. What matters more is that for the first time in 22 years, I have something on paper, something legal and permanent, that states plainly what actually happened in that house. Not my version of events, filtered through memory and hurt feelings, the version with an actual, undeniable paper trail behind it. I haven't spoken to my father since that phone call. Margaret checks in regularly, careful and gentle the way she has always been. I see Hunter and Olivia exist on social media the distant, peripheral way you see people exist when both sides have mutually, silently decided not to be part of each other's lives anymore, occasionally and from a comfortable distance, without much feeling attached to any of it. Edit, because a few people in the comments asked directly, "No, I don't regret the toast," even the parts of it that probably read as cold to people watching from outside the situation. I spent 2 decades being told that calm somehow equaled weak, that quiet somehow equaled compliant and easy to overlook. It turns out calm can also simply mean prepared, and prepared is not the same thing as passive, no matter how long it took me to understand the difference myself. Edit 2, for the people asking whether I feel any guilt about the timing of the legal case landing in the exact same week as the party itself. I genuinely don't. I started that entire process 2 weeks before I had any idea what Stephanie was planning with the name tags, before I had any reason to suspect that evening would turn into anything more than another quietly uncomfortable family gathering. The two things colliding the way they did wasn't strategy on my part, however convenient it looked from the outside. It was simply what happens when you've spent your whole life carefully keeping receipts, and the people who hurt you finally hand you a reason to use every single one of them at once. Edit 3. Someone asked what I would say to my father if he ever reached out again with what felt like a genuine apology, not the version where he explains to me what family is supposed to mean in the abstract. I'll be honest, I don't fully know yet. I used to think I would know exactly what I needed to hear from him, had even rehearsed versions of the conversation in my head over the years. Now I mostly think I just need him to understand, completely and without immediately defending himself, why a stranger printing the words, "The Disappointment," underneath my name on a piece of laminated cardstock didn't read as a joke to anyone standing in that room except the woman who made it.